Yeah, we're live. It is 10:42. This morning, I wanted to get on and do a live feed before I finish up the editing on a video that will come out today. And it's the one that lots and lots of people have been waiting for. It is the low buck truck cam on a 6-liter. We've tested similar things, tested it on a 5.3 liter, and then a very similar cam, you know, the BTR Truck Norris cam does very similar power outputs. So that's been tested on a 4.8. So you can kind of see what all, excuse me, what all these do. So that one will be coming out today. So guys, I think are excited about that. But today, what I want to talk about is supercharged combinations. We're going to take a look at testing that I did on a 4.8 and a 6-liter, and fairly wildly different power outputs. NA, the same blower and same blower speed and stuff. Obviously, we want to talk about the effect of running these blowers on these combinations, starting out with different displacements and different, NA power outputs, and then what happened to the boost, and also what happened to the power, and then, did they did they do the formula? Spoiler alert, they did not. So what I did was we put together a 4.8 that I had. That thing was, let me see, it was a fairly mild combination. I think it was just a cammed 4.8, and it made about 400, right near 400 horsepower NA. And then we ran a 6-liter that had, and it made 550. So it had a cam and cylinder heads on it. Probably, I think it had the trick flow heads on it, and some kind of camshaft in it. And when we ran them NA, naturally the bigger motor made more power, and it made, excuse me, made more power everywhere. So, and we would expect that if you ever compare a 4.8 to a 6-liter, the power output's greater, obviously, on the bigger motor, but also the torque output is way more, but down low, in the middle, everywhere. It's just, it's just bigger. Bigger is better. And so one of them made 400, and the other one made 550. When we added the supercharger, we added a Vortech T trim to it with an air-to-water intercooler. We ran on E85, and then we gave them basically the same timing curve on both motors, which is what they wanted. And then we had 80-pound injectors in both of those, I think. I think we did, because I think we had to jack up the fuel pressure to the 6-liter combination. We did. We had to raise it. I think we were running 70 pounds of static pressure on the 80-pound injectors on there, because we didn't know how far we were going to be going in the power output. And so when we ran this, we ran the Vortech T trim, and we were measuring boost in the manifold. So not right after the blower, not before the intercooler, all that stuff. So right in the manifold, which is where I like to measure it, because that tells me kind of what's going into the motor. The T trim is a pretty powerful blower. I think we could get 1,000 horsepower. I think guys have done that, and so we weren't near the limit of blower on either application. When we ran the 4.8, the power output jumped from 400 to 745 horsepower. So it did good. I mean, we picked up 345 horsepower. You can't, who could complain about that? When we did the 6-liter, it went from 550 to 900. So it picked up quite a bit. Picked up about 350 horsepower, which is interesting. So very, very comparable gains from both of the combinations with the blower. The thing to look at, though, is if you guys want to do the math, you can. I've done it already. But if you take a look at what the motor should be based on the boost level, the boost level on the 4.8 was, the boost level that we were registering was 15.5 pounds. Again, we're spinning us the same speed. And then on the 6-liter, the boost dropped to 12.8 pounds. So it dropped more than, what is that, 2.5 pounds or something? Yeah, 2.7 pounds. So the boost dropped, which is, again, exactly what we would expect to do. The fact that we were spinning at the same speed and we put it on, was making more NA power, And so it's utilizing more of the airflow. So you're producing less pressure, and the boost goes down, the power goes up, everything's happy. As I said, neither one of these made the formula, and that's not surprising. We don't typically do that with superchargers, either positive displacement or centrifugal blowers, because it takes power to drive these blowers. If you use the formula, the 4.8 should have been closer, should have been over 800, should have been like 820. And if you use the formula, the 6 liter should have been a little over 1,000. So they missed by a bit on the formula. And then I guess you could interpolate that as by saying, okay, that's how much it takes to drive the blower. That would be an inaccurate statement, because we don't know if we added, excuse me, if we added more timing, if we adjusted the air fuel. We don't know what the restriction was on if there was any on the intercooler and stuff. So that sort of interpretation of the results is probably not accurate. The best way to determine whether or not or what the parasitic drive is associated with driving the blowers, you put it on a blower dyno and you run it. And for the guys out there, they're thinking, well, yeah, you just hook up the blower and just spin it and run the motor. That doesn't tell you the same thing either, because the blower is blowing in the atmosphere, and that doesn't tell you, because that's a completely different situation for the blower and a completely different amount of parasitic loss associated with driving the blower under those conditions than the conditions that we put it under when we're actually making the power. So that's a different situation. But it's interesting nonetheless, and it's one of the things that I liked doing way back early on when I did a lot of Vortech stuff on my 5-liter Mustang, because I had serial number 001 on my Mustang and ran it around forever. Went out to all kinds of different Silver State races. We ran it for like 12 years in a row, although I think the first 2 were naturally aspirated, and then later on I had a supercharger on there. But we ran a bunch of those. We were in a bunch of top speed things and Foxtrot events and all. And it was my daily driver. So I have nothing but good things to say about, supercharging your car or turbocharging your car, as long as you do the tune correctly. And even back then, correctly was was definitely in air quotes. When I ran the Silver State, we had the motor was a 302. It had trick flow heads on it. It had that Crane 224 camshaft in it. It had a Cobra or GT40S kind of intake manifold on it, and then it had the Vortech on it. And back then I ran it with a Pro ammeter, 24-pound injectors, and an FMU. And the fuel pressure was just pegged at 100 psi during one of the runs. So it's just, that's not ideal. I don't know what the air fuel was because I hadn't monitored it. I didn't know what that was. Later on, I would use one of those hokey little like BZ meters. And I say that hokey, I think, should be in air quotes there, because it actually worked fairly well. It was fairly accurate. And what I did was we compared that to a Hariba, which we know is accurate, and drove it around in the car and went like, yeah, that's about 11 to 1. That's about 12. That's 11 or 14.7 is right there, right in the middle. All of that's pretty accurate. So what I would say about those things, and we were even monitoring it off of a narrow band sensor, because that's what that BZ meter was hooked up to, one of the factory sensors. But it was, and I think it was hooked up to the secondary sensor, if I remember right, or maybe the sensor that it came with was hooked up. I just remember it not being a really good sensor. But it worked fairly well, though. It showed us where we were. We're rich, we're lean, it won't tell you it's 11.7 or 11.6, but it'll tell you whether it's 11 or 12. And so that's really, it's not ideal information, but it's much better information than just stepping on the gas and listening for detonation. That's not a good idea. So especially back then, I think that was a good idea, and we got to watch it during the race. It could also tell you, because when you're running wide open throttle for 35 minutes before you lift off and go through the narrows, when you're running like that, you have time to check gauges. You're racing down the road. One of the straightaways is like 10 or 11 miles long. So you're just, wow, as fast as the car will go. You're like looking around. Is it overheating? Is the oil pressure good? What's the temperature? What's our little BZ meter? And if it were to have some sort of weird catastrophic thing, like you lost a spark plug or lost an injector, whatever, it would show you that, It would go, hey, look, like something's wonky, something's going on here. So that was a good idea. But ever since doing that stuff, doing the testing on a supercharger like that, like we were running 7, 8, 10 pounds, whatever, depending on which blower we were at, because I eventually ran it with an R trim and then blew the motor up because I didn't have enough fuel for it and didn't have proper tuning for it. But when you run that on like a stock 302, it does one thing. You run it on a mild 302 or an LS, it does another thing. You run it on a bigger motor, it does another thing. And a lot of guys, especially back then, didn't realize, and I think even now they don't realize it, that, hey, if I make my motor a lot more efficient, NA, two good things happen. One is the boost comes down, which is beneficial, but also the power goes up. Again, also beneficial. So nothing but good things. Nothing but good things there. Start our poll. Okay, is more boost and less NA power better than less boost and more NA power? See if that's too difficult to understand. I don't think it should be. It should be good. Okay, Tim, what's going on? Good evening, gentlemen. I found a turbo Volvo in the junkyard. I'm going to strip it for my 240 project. Very cool. Scott, what's going on? AJ, Oliver. It was a good day. Station Road rat rods. Cool. V8 brick Volvos always sound fun. My first four-cylinder, soon to be my first turbo car as well. Only had pushrod V8s. Turbo stuff, particularly four-cylinder stuff, is fun because it's really easy to get power out of a V8. You know, put a camshaft in almost anything, and it's good. But the turbo stuff is really fun because you can make such a big difference. Sergio, doing a boosted 6-liter with dish pistons. I have a set of 862s and 799s. I can only get 91 octane, which suggests running 10 psi. I think you'll get away with more on the 799 heads for a turbo combination and a pump gas thing. I would lean toward the lower compression because you'll get more out of adding boost than you will out of adding compression. Dan, my neighbor had one with almost 1,400 horsepower. 1,400 horsepower in a Volvo 4-cylinder motor? What's the best power upgrade for an 8.1 Gen 7 big block? That thing needs cams, but then after that, it needs the other things too. It needs ported heads and needs ported intake, and it's not cheap to do that stuff to the 8.1. I still want it to be fuel efficient. Well, Eric, the nice thing about a turbo 4-cylinder combination is you can make it plenty efficient. The 200 mile an hour, 226 mile an hour Civic would still get, I think we got 33 or 34 miles per gallon cruising with it because it didn't require lots of inefficient things on it. Found a build board guy shows a restrictive area on the intake on the stock intake. I think that's a good idea to search. I was working on my downpipe yesterday, still trying to fit a 6-inch oval exhaust under the truck. That's got to be a little bit of a chore. It would be cool if you could section out the floorboard and then have the oval exhaust be a portion of that and then just weld it on both sides. Station Road Rat Rods has a lot of junkyard Ellis builds. Cool. I'll have to check it out. Paul, what's going on? I said no on the poll, but I think it depends on what you want your power curve to look like. Street driven, lower NA, more boost. What about running a turbo off of one bank? Yeah, you can do that. Saab did it on their factory stuff for a while. Thinking of putting a cam on my stock 4.8. Any recommendations or steps to follow through with the cam? I have videos up on how to swap cams, or have a video up on that. So it depends on what you're trying to do with your 4.8 and where you want your power. It's hard to get more low speed power out of a 4.8 with a camshaft. You're almost always going to trade. So if you've got a 4.8 and you're trying to make more power, you're going to make more power in the middle and top part of the RPM range. And on a 4.8, a converter is a really good idea. How much are your t-shirts? They are $20. And then I have these two blue and red. And right now I have these are the wrong cam shirts. These are the two that I have available. Was your Salt Flat Civic B series? Yes, it was a sub 2 liter. It was a G class. So it was a sub 2 liter, or right at 2 liters. And it was we ran it with two different blocks. One of them we used a dart block, and the other one we used a sleeve GSR block. Had to raise a passenger side floorboard up 2 inches up front. Okay, cool. So see that work? We're thinking like that. I said yes on the poll because low boost is not something I'm interested in. Okay, you're just going all in. The Saab V6s were terrible. Well, they didn't do it for very long, so. How to join 6-inch oval pipes. What are you joining them to? I had a ton of 4-cylinder Saabs, and those were always much better for everything. I don't think I've ever even driven a Saab turbo. I've always liked them though. How much are the autograph t-shirts? They would be the same. The Volvo had a tall deck small block with 1,300 horsepower, and then he bought a big block and swapped it in place. It had an F1 blower and 2 throttle bodies, added 4-inch dual exhaust. It had a centrifugal blower and it made that much power. Still trying to figure out which exhaust manifold to use for my FG Barra motor. Leaning towards a 6-boost T3. Really want a stainless option, but I can't seem to find one. Yeah, I don't know about all the availability of exhaust setups for that. If it was mine and I was doing a low buck thing, I'd use the factory exhaust. The Saabs that are front-wheel drive, but the engine still sits in the bay like a rear-wheel drive engine. Yeah, it's weird. 3D, what's going on? First of your streams I've been able to catch. What parts would you recommend for swapping an L33 into Tahoe? Already got the motor. Debating a Trailblazer SS style intake and possibly long tube headers. Both of those are a good idea if you can get them. Do you have a cam for that thing? Because a cam is going to be the biggest change you can make in the power output of that motor. An L33 already has the 799 or 243 heads. Not that I think that that's going to be any better than a guy that has 706 or 862 heads, but you also have a flat top piston, which is good. The L33 has a slightly better camshaft stock than the LM7s and the other dish piston 5.3s do, but still a camshaft goes a long way. Like the cam that I have, that low buck truck camshaft, you look at some of the videos, or a BTR Truck Norris or Chopacabra, any of those kinds of cams that are still pretty good drivers, you're going to pick up, 60 or 65, 70 horsepower. You can buy a new OEM style FG Barrett turbo manifolds. Use a 3582. Joining the 6-inch down pipe to the 6-inch oval section running under the truck. How are you doing that transition? Are you just hammer forming it and pinching it down? Or not pinching it down, but reshaping it? Need to replace my stock 5.3. I want to eliminate AFM. I'm open to any year 5.3. I don't know the differences. An 08 is definitely a Gen 4. So the things that you want to look at is your Gen 4 block does not have a provision for a cam sensor in the back of the block like the Gen 3 stuff does. So you're going to want something, if you want to plug right into the harness that you have, you're going to want a Gen 4 setup on it so that it plugs in, so that you don't have that rear plug. You have a 4X cam trigger on there, and your trigger, your cam sensor is in the front of your, it's in the timing cover. Not that you can't do that to a Gen 3. It just takes a different cover, and it takes extending the harness and stuff. So if you just want something that goes in, you should look at a Gen 4. Newest cam for LS that you've tested. I don't know what that question is, Bobby. Thanks for the help. I got my rotating assembly now. Very cool. Easy to do a clutch when the flywheel face the bumper. I should clarify how much are Lisa holding her autograph t-shirts. Yeah, she would definitely be more popular. Stainless versus iron pipe. I don't think you'll see any difference there. I've seen guys do Schedule 40 stuff. I don't know about the longevity of that. Stainless is usually stainless. I don't think is as good for a turbo application. If I want to add a turbo to my 6-liter, how do I go about finding a good tuner for it? I don't have that capability. I don't know where you are, and you can have guys do remote tunes. Matt Happel at Sloppy has tunes that you can get. He has a catalog of them that you can get those if you follow what he's done for that tune. So if you get the cam that he has and get the turbo that he has and the injectors that he has and the pump that he has, and use that tune in a factory ECU, if that's what you're doing, you'll have good results because he's run that many, many times. Made 99 horsepower on a D16Y7 with a VTEC head through an automatic. Cool. I'm going for sound. Well, the sound is definitely going to be different between like if you do, when we run the turbo stuff on the dyno and we run the truck manifolds that I have, the factory truck LS manifolds into the Y pipe, or we run the tubular headers, the stainless tubular headers, the sound quality is definitely different with the tubular headers. A lot of those Saab engines, the B23-4R specifically, came with forged internals. All you need for 500 wheel horsepower was a Dodge turbo, big injectors, and a free internet tune. Was it the Dodge Cummins turbo that was big enough to do 500 wheel horsepower? And how about the head gasket and stuff for those? Did you put studs in it? Does anyone here have experience running boosts on 11.5 to 1 compression? Yes. Lots of experience doing that. Wondering if I can add small boost to street strip application. Yes, depending on what the octane you're using is. Mains in the house. If you ran the blower with an electric motor, 1-to-1 RPM with the engine, power consumed by the E motor would be really close to the power consumed by the blower. That should be close. Yeah, that if it's only driving the blower. or we can just, like I said, run it on a blower, an actual blower dyno, and then we can vary it and test it at different boost levels and RPM levels and flow levels and stuff. Took a 6-inch pipe, squeezed it in a form. Nice. The down pipe is fabricated in pieces because it goes from round to oval in a bend. Okay. So did you do the little pie slices? I forgot what the Japanese word for that is when they're doing that on the intake. Aussie equivalent to their Aristo. I'm running 11.5 to 1 at 20 psi on pump gas on a big block. Is RPM a function of valve stem stability or short stroke and piston speed? Do you mean valve train stability? If you mean valve train stability, then yes, it's that. It's not stroke length. Should I keep my 317 heads or change to 706 for boost? You should keep your 317 heads. Poly Mega Squirt or HP, which one should I purchase? I don't know. I haven't used all of those. I normally use a Holly because what we're doing on the engine dyno is time sensitive. So we have to be able to tune it very quickly. And so doing it with a factory ECU is not an option. I've done MS3 Pro and it works. They all work really well and they will all do what you want. That 14 initial, haven't got a daily back on it yet. It does well watch inlet air temperatures. So Dan, okay, the whole set HX35s, okay. No need for head studs, but make sure the gasket wasn't already leaking. I've always wondered why there's not more people using mild steel schedule pipe for turbo manifolds. It's almost impossible to crack in comparison to stainless and doesn't need back purge during welding. That the Schedule 40 stuff used to be the go-to thing. I don't know if that's still the case now. Some people like the way that the stainless stuff looks. What is valve lashing? You don't have to lash the valves on a that's just a bolt down rocker on an LS. So all you do is just tighten the rocker down and you just torque the bolt the required amount. But the way that you adjust lash on an LS is with push rod length. So you have to make sure that the push rod length is right. Fox, I'm sure Katie's going to tell you how he's doing it, but the key to doing high boost on pump gas is timing and charge temperature. I built a 4.8 stage 3 truckster cam. Is that a family truckster cam? Ported heads and Trailblazer SS intake manifold 20 over with dual exhaust. My wife's H3. She's happy with it. That should be good. Hopefully, does it have a I'm hoping it has gears in it, and I'm hoping it has a converter in it. I'll send you pics, but pie cuts for the bends. Okay, that makes sense, Scott. I'd assume I'd pull a lot of timing out there and test. Yeah. Yeah, if you don't give it enough timing to hurt itself, that's definitely beneficial. Do any of the head bolts go into water jackets? No, you don't need thread sealant on an LS one. What you need to do is make sure that you clean out the holes in the block, and chasing it, if there's rust in there, is a good idea. But blow all that out. Make sure there's no liquid down there, because when you tighten the bolt down, if there's liquid down there, either oil or water, what happens is as you're tightening it down, especially guys that run it in with a gun, which is not a good idea, what you could do is hydrolock the bottom of the block where the thread is, where the bolt hole is at the bottom. And what it does is it pushes that liquid into somewhere, because it won't compress. So it has to go somewhere. And what it does is crack the block. And so just make sure you don't do that. Should I turbo my 8.1? Yes, lots of guys are running around with turbo stuff. One of the guys that comes here all the time has 600,000 miles on his. He's got a 3500 with an 8.1 and a turbo on it. He tows it. He uses it every day, and it works really good. So as long as you have the tune correct, you can do that. Coincidence, you're live streaming. I was just searching for your channel for this. See, I picked up a Gen 3 4.8 liter. I have 243 heads with valve train work done. the information on the 4.8 with 243s and a boost application. Yeah, it does the same thing as every other LS motor with every other LS head. There's no difference between that combination. In fact, later Gen 4 4.8 stuff came with 243s or 799s on them. So boost has nothing to do with that, your displacement of the motor or your cylinder head. What you're looking at is what does that motor do NA, and then where are we at, and then how much boost are we running, and how much ever boost we're running, it just multiplies whatever's there. And for me, if I was doing a 4.8, I wouldn't pick a 243 head for it. I would pick a 799 or a 706 or an 862 head on it. That motor, even if the 243 head flows more than the 706 or 862 head, which it does, that ability doesn't come into play until we need a lot more airflow for the NA combination, and you don't need that on a 4.8. And so the low speed power of the smaller head is definitely going to be better. And if you're adding boost to it, you can get to the limit of whatever that turbo is. So I'd much rather have the low speed power with the 706 and 862 head, which is going to make as much power as that 243 head does on a 4.8 anyway. And I would argue that it's going to make more. But that head will also work, as will any other head. Aaron, what's going on? What will I need to do 1,000 horsepower on the LQ9? I already intake tube and headers and exhaust. You need to have a turbo and a cam. Thumper, it's raining today. Where are you at? But thumbs up. In fact, 2 thumbs up for the 671 on a Pontiac. 456 gears and a converter. Oh, okay. Then, oh yeah. So in the H2, definitely. Well, then that's going to work good. Would doing a low buck cam affect fuel efficiency at all on an L33? Probably does. For most people, what it does is most people don't actually measure fuel mileage like in a steady state cruise, actual environment where you're trying to purposely get good fuel mileage. Most people put a camshaft in and go, yeah, my mileage is much worse. Yeah, because now you're sampling the power a lot more. It has way more to do with how much throttle angle you have now that you're enjoying your camshaft than it does like a steady state 2,000 RPM cruising down the freeway. How much less or more is the fuel mileage going to be doing that versus now you're, like I said, sampling all the extra power. Is there any form of safe boost on an LY6 without gapping the rings? Yes, there is. But since you don't know what the gap is, you don't know, there's no direct correlation for a number of boost, a number of pounds of boost versus I don't know what the gap is. Because also, it's not boost, it's temperature. It's ring temperature and growth. So you could run 5 pounds, but if you're legging the motor out and doing a roll race on the freeway for minutes at a time, you can put enough temperature in there, even at low boost, where the ring butts together and you snap the ringlet on the piston. So you don't know what it is. That being said, lots of guys do run boost on them without gapping them. The colder that your temperature is, the air going into the turbo, the better your fuel is, like E85 or higher octane stuff, the better your tune is, probably the richer the mixture is. All of those things can help you survive that. But I've run boost many, many times on stuff that has not had the rings gapped in them. But every time I did that, if it breaks, I know that that's on me. Low NA power number could have a problem where if a motor does 400 horsepower with 10 PSI, the plugged up a bit does 400 horsepower at 23 PSI. There could be a field of 650 horsepower international problem in the low. I don't understand what you're saying there. 3D. No, there's no bad questions. That's all good questions. Gotta wait till the parts are open so I get WD-40. I know, I always try to keep some around, but it seems like it goes fast. Essentially a 4250 stroke copy of Big Chief's engine. Well, that should make good power then. Saw something about when you go turbo, your engine is supposed to get different power spark plugs. How much of that is necessary versus marketing? What you want to do is put a colder, you want to do two things. You want to put a colder plug in, a colder heat range plug, and also you want to bring the spark plug gap down. Bring it down to about 20 thousandths. In regards to the poll question, I'd rather have low compression motor and high boost rather than high compression and low boost. Okay, that makes sense. Does anyone use a 6.7 turbo diesel? Yeah, guys have used that turbo on junkyard LS motors before. I don't think that turbo is super powerful. And the thing is, the reason a lot of guys now are not going and getting junkyard turbos is because they're not in a lot of these places, they're not any less expensive than just getting these turbos that you can get online. Getting ready to give up on the EFI system on my 5-liter. Thinking of doing a carb. Just won't be sacrificing too much potential gain. Well, it depends on going from a EFI to a carburetor. You can actually gain power. The thing that will dictate whether or not you're going to gain or not is, are you changing the intake manifold? Thumper. Okay, you're up by Tom. If you see Tom, tell him I said, hey, I'm sending him some other things. I need the other guy's shirt. I'm going to come up with those too. The only low buck cam for my engine is the stock cam. That is the lowest buck one available. And it works for lots of stuff. Why are there high and low impedance injectors? I'm not an electrical technician, but I think it has to do with the ability to because you know how an injector works, right? It's a solenoid, so it opens and closes. So I think it has to do with being able to open and close the solenoid against a higher resistance, probably. And it takes more current to do that. I turned the boost up and now I have to use it every time. Why am I down to 12 miles per gallon? Yeah, that's the other thing with boost. Will a turbo hurt my fuel mileage? In almost every case, it will. Again, for the same reason that the cam does, is because you're like, oh yeah, that feels good. Oh yeah, that feels good. Even if you're not just like, and spinning the tires and enjoying yourself and doing donuts or whatever, even if you're just using it a little bit, that's more fuel. Should have answered this before, but how much power can I push through my 13 LMG before I need to change from the VVT setup? I've heard it gets unreliable. I don't know that. I don't know. I haven't ever tried to modify a VVT motor. Things you will run into with a VVT motor, if you want to, if you're trying to change to a VVT performance cam, is that you have less ability to adjust the cam, because as you go up in duration, you change the piston to valve clearance, and so you can't swing the cam as much anymore. So you have to they put limiters on them, so it only swings just a little bit. It keeps it within the range of available piston to valve clearance. If you go up in spring rate, I've heard that can affect the VVT. I don't know what you're trying to do. There are lots of things that you can do that will help it, irrespective of a camshaft. You could put long tube headers on it. You could tune it, maybe an air intake. All of those things can help, but not nearly as much as a camshaft does. All-wheel drive turbo LS street truck for fun. I don't know what you mean by thoughts, though. Is a ball bearing turbo a must? No, absolutely not. Do the intake exhaust manifold ports line up between Gen 5 and Gen 6 big blocks? Are the heads interchangeable? On a Gen 5 and a Gen 6, the heads are physically interchangeable, but the gaskets are different and the exhaust is the same. Tom, what's going on? Is a bushing turbo good? You mean a journal bearing turbo? What kind of vehicle do I have? I have a few, but the one that I drive every day is a 02 Silverado with a 5.3. Yeah, KD has years on his journal bearing turbos and lots and lots of early turbos on factory cars are journal bearing stuff. Or street and strip, would you go turbo or supercharger? The choice between those two things has nothing to do with street and strip. That has to do with how you want your power delivery done and how much power you're trying to make. And also for a lot of people, what the visual statement is. When you lift the hood, do you like having a turbo sitting next to an ugly truck manifold? Most guys don't. Do you like having a polished blower sitting there in the middle? Lots of guys do. So a lot of guys choose it just for that. So either one of those will give you more than enough power for whatever kind of performance thing that you want. So it comes down to other things. My mileage actually went up after I went back to normal driving. I think most of it is from responsiveness. I've done one electrical engineering university module. Oilless turbos are the move. I don't agree with that. I would love that to be a... I don't have confidence in that. Street strip, correct turbo sizing is a must. You will make more power per pound of boost with a turbo than you will with a blower. The boost response will be different between a turbo and a blower. And from either blower, like a positive displacement blower or a centrifugal, the boost curve supplied by turbo is going to be different than both of those. So again, which one do you want? The easy answer on the 5.3 is to get the TrickFlow VVT delete kit. Yeah, there's lots of guys that have the VVT delete stuff and get one of Richard's cams. See, Dan knows how to make stuff happen. I have a Gen 5 TBI big block in my truck. I want to swap in Gen 6 heads, Gen 6 block, but still run the stock TBI. The stock TBI intake is going to be a... from the Gen 5 is going to be a peanut port opening. So the opening, the ports on the Gen 6 head are going to be bigger than the intake are. It's not really a problem. It should still seal, but just know that there's going to be a mismatch between the peanut port intake manifold and then between the peanut port intake manifold and then the bigger port on the head. That's not too much of a problem. It'll still work, but that will be there. But the nice thing is those heads will have more flow, and most importantly for what you're doing, probably since you're retaining the TBIs, it also have more compression. My blower satin is all business. Nice. Polishing, it just keeps the heat in, though. I should have asked which is more drivable for the street. Again, you can put blowers on to have them be perfectly drivable at part throttle. All that works good. Same thing with a turbo. Turbo is going to have the same drivability as an NA combination. So either one of those work well. Go Garrett. There are the best turbos, hands down. Garrett makes good stuff. It's just a lot more expensive than the other things that are out there. What's your advice on adding a low torque for my stock 6-liter? It dropped speed big time going uphill, pulling a trailer. Just did a tune on it. But Mike, if you put a camshaft in it, like that low buck truck that I have in a 6-liter, and you'll see what happens when I post the video today, you'll get power in the RPM range that you would be using if you drop down a gear. Because like we've had this discussion before, nobody lugs a motor up a hill at 2000 RPM. You can't do it if you're towing stuff. And I know, because I've towed lots of stuff with my truck. When you go up a hill, I go up the Grapevine or Baker grade or Mountain grade or, all these things. When you do that, you're in a different gear and you're at higher RPM. So the torque that you're making at 2,000 becomes irrelevant when now you're at 3,000 RPM going up the hill in third gear, let's say, without the converter locked up. So you'd be interested in what torque you're at 3,000 RPM, and the cam will definitely add power in that RPM range. My daily driver is an 01 Suburban with a 408. Nice. Grease turbo work till you're in the desert. All things being equal, have you run a test on the exact same engine setup with the same size journal bearing turbo and ball bearing turbo, wheel, exotic turbo, and know the difference in the dyno graph? I've never done a comparison, a direct comparison of a journal bearing versus a ball bearing turbo to see, that have exactly the same everything else, where all you did was change what the bearing is. And I've never seen anybody do that either. I've never seen them do that without something else changing on there. So I've never done that, and I've never seen that. Why would you delete the VVT? I wouldn't if I had VVT on my truck, I wouldn't delete it. I would just keep it that way. But my truck is all stock. So going to do a VVT delete and cam upgrade to my LMG, but then I found an LY6. Boom, problem solved. That makes sense. I just want more bottom end and pass smog. I don't know about any smog legal camshafts. Less plumbing, though. It's had good luck on the mini jet boat. The blower on my car definitely draws attention. I bet when it's sticking out of the hood, people notice it. Is the port entry on 706 heads runners smaller than? Yes, it is. The whole port is smaller, and so are the valves, and so are the chambers. I live in Florida, always have is tomato grade. Mike, is it worth it to do my sloppy stage 2 or do a low buck? It depends on what you're trying to do. I have, I can show you power data between those two. The low buck truck cam definitely makes a lot more low speed power than the sloppy stage 2. And when I say low speed power, I don't mean 2,000 RPM. I can tell you what it will do. Let's see here. Test data, cam testing. Okay, so the low buck truck camshaft or a Chupacabra or a Truck Norris cam will make more power than the sloppy stage 2 up to 5,000 RPM. It'll be better than or equal to that camshaft up to 5,000. Beyond 5,000, the sloppy stage 2 makes more power. And it made 420, like 16 more horsepower. Down at 32 or 3,300 RPM. 45. Well, down at 3,200 RPM, it was down like 33 or 34 foot-pounds of torque. So whichever one of those you want more, that's the cam that you should choose. If I was putting one in a truck that I was using, I would not put a sloppy stage 2 camshaft in it. If I was putting in a 4.8, I would not put a sloppy stage 2 camshaft in it. And if I didn't have a converter, I would not put a sloppy stage 2 camshaft in it. And not just that one. I'm not just picking on that camshaft. Matt's obviously shown you can make lots of power with it, and we know what it does. I've tested it many, many times. And you can make lots of power with it. It just doesn't have it needs a converter, and it's, in my opinion, it's too big for a 4.8 unless it's a 4.8 that you really, really want to rev. The only reason I want a Coyote or my 5.4 is 8,000 RPM and 50 kilos less mass. Miles per gallons are similar. I would be surprised if the fuel mileage isn't better on a Coyote than a 5.4. At idle, I measured that a T6 S475 getting 800 milliliters a minute of oil at 750 RPM only drains 15 milliliters a minute past the tight journal bearing. 15 milliliters a minute takes a lot of smoke without a 7 to 15 psi vacuum pump on the drain. So you're feeding it more than it's draining? How could you be getting 800 milliliters and only drain 15 milliliters? You'd end up having pressure inside the bearing area. That doesn't make any sense. You should be draining more than you're feeding on a turbo. And I don't know how you wouldn't, given the fact that you're spraying the thing very, very small orifice under pressure, but the drain size is dramatically larger than the feed is. And so the flow rate of the drain should be way more than the feed is. Or you need to make your feed orifice smaller. Saw something about a turbo having a retaining bolt machined into the wheel. I've never seen it machined into the wheel. I've never seen them thread the impeller on or the turbine on. There is a retaining nut that goes onto a shaft, and then you tighten the nut down. Can I make 1,000 horsepower on my 2006 6-liter without piston gap with 75 millimeter precision and Texas? No, you can't. You have to put ring gap in it. If you're wanting to make 1,000 horsepower, you need to take the steps that are necessary to make 1,000 horsepower. One of those is definitely to put ring gap in it. Your question should be, can I safely run 7 pounds on my 2006 6-liter without ring gap? And then the answer would be maybe. Mike, yeah, send me an email and I can send you over the power curve on that if you want to look at those. Just want to say that chatting with you guys is way more fun than chatting with my coworkers. Hey, your coworkers are cool, man. I love a Godzilla. Do you think it would be more instructive to talk about horsepower at lower RPM rather than torque? People seem really adverse to taking their truck out of overdrive when towing. For me, they're the same thing. Because if I talk about that it made 200 horsepower, and then I also talk about where it made that at, that's a torque number. So to me, they're the same thing because I look at it on as a graph. Is your Silverado a single cab? Love to follow you other places if I can see some of it there. There are pictures of my truck in some of the videos. Take a look at where we put an M90 on that truck, and you can see it. We put an M90 or tried to put an M90. Well, we did put it on, but the truck's not running very well right now. But we'll revisit that. Best towing cam for a stock computer controlled L31 without changing anything except springs. What year is that? And you're not gonna be able to put a camshaft in without changing the tune on it. Oh, Thumper, cool. I'll check it out. I think the Coyote would be more better with wider bore spacing. Imagine have a 7-liter Coyote. What if they could make a larger displacement single overhead cam motor based on the Coyote? That would help with like shock tower area if they could make it a single cam. But just a bigger bore spacing would be cooler. And if they did a different bore spacing, it wouldn't affect this way. It would only affect front to back. What about the 6.2 Ford? Isn't that a mod motor? I don't know. You could ask one of these guys here. I don't know where Admiral is. I guess it's a modular family. Richard, in your opinion, is it safe to say that the iron 4.8 crankshaft can be as, why did you capitalize can be as strong as a run-of-the-mill forged 4-liter crankshaft due to the better journal overlap on the 3268 crank? Better journal overlap. I don't agree with that. I would look at the metallurgy first and then your journal overlap second. But I would also look at it like, how much power are you trying to make? We know that on a 4.8 that you you can get up to the limit of the block with that stock crank. So do you want to go more than that? If you want to go more than that, I would put a steel crank in it. And then when you put a steel crank in it, forged rods and forged pistons, then you don't have enough block. So Arden, you ran this with the turbo not being fed oil, and you ran the line into a measuring cup over a given period of time. And then you measured the drain, you drained the oil into the same type of measuring cup over the same period of time, and then compared the two, right? Because that would be the way to do it. So my question is, why are you overfeeding the turbo? Because if you have 800 milliliters going in, how does it not fill up and build pressure over time? Because if you can't get that oil out, how do you not have pressure inside the system? And then why are you doing that? Because obviously the turbo doesn't need that much oil. So your restrictor needs to be smaller. Building an LQ4 706 for heads for a jet boat application. Camshaft wise, I want to maximize average power below 5,500. I'd also like to hit 500 horsepower before 6,000. What would you suggest? An LQ4 with 706 heads, if they're stock, takes a really big camshaft to get to 500 horsepower. And it's not going to do the thing that you want below that. So we ran a 706 head on the 6-liter with a 459 and a 469 camshaft, which is a 231 cam. And it just made, the 706 head on the 6-liter LY6 with the 459 cam, which is a 231, 239 camshaft, made 513. And it did it at 62 or 6,300 RPM. It did make more than 500 at 6,000, made 511. But it's going to require that kind of camshaft with that head on there. And it made peak torque at 4,800. So if you put a smaller camshaft in there with more low speed power, you have a jet boat, so you're probably fine. So yeah, you can do that. Just put that kind of camshaft in it, or a BTR hot rod cam or a red hot cam would be fine. Blake, thanks for the office hours. Happy to help. We only got a couple more minutes. I'm going to close out our poll at, is more boost and less NA power better than less boost and more NA power? So everybody wants the less boost and more NA power. Okay, good. We'll end our poll. Chevy Gen 1 355. You got to tell me what the duration is at 50. The advertised duration doesn't really tell me anything. All DQ Vortech head single turbo setup would be a good efficient turbo to pull. Well, first of all, what intake do you have on there? And unless you have a rising boost curve, you're not going to make power at 6,400 with that camshaft, I don't think. But instead of looking at RPM, how much power do you want to make? Are the low buck truck cams NSR? No, they're not. They're 550 lifts. So you need to run at least like an LS3 or LS6 spring. You think running a wide LSA would satisfy the knock sensor in a GM TBI setup? Why would you be activating the knock sensor? The thing that I would be concerned with is if you're running a TBI motor, the ECU is not going to be happy with the 220 camshaft more than likely. Please tell me you want to know how to make 600 plus horsepower on a small block Chevy? The easiest way to do that, and the least expensive way, is to do a heads cam and intake 350 and then add a turbo to it. That's very easy. So Scott, you were wondering if the Godzilla is going to be a thing? You can make 600 horsepower with a NA small block, but usually a bigger one works better, or a very expensive smaller one. Yep, 2-minute warning. I ask about the 4.8 liter crankstrike because I want to build a big bore screw LS, but I don't want to chew up an expensive block with a broken 4.8 crank. I wouldn't use the cast crank on a if you're driving. I thought you were talking about a turbo combination. I wouldn't use a cast crank, a 4.8 crank on a screw blower. Especially if you're trying to really spin that thing up. And does somebody make a dedicated blower crankshaft? Have you done a stock vehicle HP tuners optimized tune video? You mean just have a stock motor and then put a tune on it? I'm sure Matt's probably done that. I don't do tuning with HP tuners or anything, so I don't do that with factory ECUs. Most of my stuff is done on the engine dyno and not the chassis dyno, and that would have to be something that would be done on the chassis dyno. Big block Chevy 427 versus an LS 427 coming soon? No, I don't have either one of those. $232, $238. Oh, that actually is going to make power up there. I've not seen an LS blower snout crank, only support plates for the front bearing mounts. Yeah. I'm surprised that somebody hasn't done one, because when they break it, they usually break at the first journal, right? And I wonder if it's a D-cell thing on those. And guys are breaking them. That would be an interesting look into, although it's beyond this channel because we don't. That's a really tiny subset of racers that are doing that. And on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys. I got to get back to editing the 6-liter video, which people should like. And then after that, we're going to do another turbo thing. So I will see you guys all later. Later, Gator.